we can listen from her. What are those salient features of pulse diagnosis which can be used for selection of food for every individual, whether in healthy condition or whether the person is ill? So, without being in between the madam and we all together, I'll request her to start her presentation and share her views on this subject with all of us. Vanita madam, please. Thank you.
Namaskar. Namaskar, Professor Sanjay ji, and I'm actually privileged and honored to be with you, sharing my wisdom and knowledge regarding this Nadi Pariksha and the selection of food according to the Nadi, especially in these challenging times and during COVID especially, and people are just uh, seeking more and more natural ways of combating and fight with this health crisis that's going across the globe. And I really feel privileged, and thank you so much for your kind introduction. So I myself feel privileged to be and honored to be among all you. So just getting to start like with the main what we are here for and gathered up, I would first like to discuss more about the relevance and the clinical significance of Nadi Pariksha in the traditional sciences and in Ayurveda. So I have been practicing Ayurveda in Australia for the last 20 years altogether, more than 20 years. It's been a great journey. I mean to say, I'm currently representing the complementary health industry here in Australia for representing for Ayurveda mainly. We call it Ayurveda when we write it, but we say Ayurved and we say Yoga. And it's just when we use Visarga in Sanskrit that started getting read as A, like in the Western world. But it's one of the Vedas we know. Out of the four Vedas, Ayurveda is such a legacy and deeper science and a science of life from where we can offer to the community and to the world in a lot of different ways. So it's not about just Nadi Pariksha, it's the relevance of Ayurveda, relevance of yoga, and the relevance of traditional food and diet that especially we Southeast Asians or Indians, we in our kitchen have a lot of spices that we use more on the basis of, they are called herbs, but they are spices that we have been using or our ancestors have been using for centuries now. And what's happening in today's times it's more to do with all kind of different diet plans. Like there is a paleo diet, there is a keto diet, there is blood type, there is all these kind of different it's become like a fad. And I personally recommend and suggest that not to kind of go into, you don't need to follow any kind of specific diet apart from what's recommended or suggested by the Ayurvedic physician or the consultant, because that's the diet that's in tune with your body and the nature. And it's something that we recommend and suggest according to the individual body type, which is the prakriti, and then there is a vikruti. So Ayurveda is it has got so much to offer that by doing the pulse and the Nadi Pariksha, we can predict and select not only the foods according to the prakriti or vikruti, but it's even the mental state. And even if you diagnose or do the Nadi Pariksha or pulse analysis, you can even pick up like on the foods that you can choose according to the medical condition and then according to the body type. So it goes in along with your prakriti, but then you can look at the vikruti or the medical condition and you can suggest some according to that to get the person back into its balanced state, because it's all about creating a balance in the imbalanced constitution in Ayurveda. Or the pulse. Pulse is a deep study. So you need to understand first the relevance and the clinical significance of Nadi and the Nadi Pariksha analysis in the traditional sciences and Ayurveda, because it's practiced in a lot of other traditional medicines too, like Chinese, Tibetan, and Greece, like in the Greek medicine. That's where it evolved from and originated as well. But Ayurveda has, I being the fifth generation in the family, I have never seen any client or done any kind of like analysis or diagnosis rather than from the pulse. And that's what I practice and I preach. And I have had many, I've seen thousands of clients in Australia, Westerns and Indians and Sri Lankans, because Ayurveda is practiced all over the globe these days. So let's get to the hinge of what the Nadi Pariksha says in the tradition and its significance. So, okay. So how did it evolve? Like an evolution of a knowledge of arterial pulse in the age of discovery, Greek medicine. So beginning from 15th century until the end of 18th century. And then the Western medieval medicine inherited a lot of existing ideas from the antique, like medical science traces its roots directly to the Greeks. But their epic poems, like what I've mentioned here, the Odyssey, offer insight on ancient medical practices before the time of Hippocrates. The recurrent theme in the poem is that even in today's pandemic or epidemic, what's happening, they believe, according to the pulse, that it happens when the god is displeased with you, sorry. And so it's any kind of like illnesses that come to humanity, it comes from ourselves, from our body. We self-manifest any kind of like conditions or the vikruti. It's not that we develop, it's all because of our eating habits and our lifestyle that actually we manifest any kind of like illness in the body. So taking that into account is the pandemic, cause of pandemic, because people had been avoiding all these like plant-based foods, and they are more on the meats and non-vegetarian diet, like, and they are very pushing themselves away from the nature and away from their body, and which is causing more and more natural calamities across the globe and in the world. So we, as a historians, we say that medieval world valued the sanctity of church than the actual, the philosophers, the doctors like Aristotle, Hippocrates, Avicenna, they used different pulse variations in the health and disease to assess the patients. So it's not something that has just evolved recently. It's as long as Ayurveda has been there, the pulse diagnosis and the pulse analysis in Ayurveda has been there since, even if it wasn't much in detail, but even to assess your prakriti or vikruti, pulse has always been a tool or a way of diagnosis or analysis that has been used since the times, since Ayurveda has been here. So the pulse, what it is in Arab-Islamic medicine, so it was practiced from 8th century to the 14th century. Islamic medicine preserved, systemized, and developed the medical knowledge of classic antiquity, including those of Hippocrates and Dioscorides. It integrated concepts of ancient Greek, Roman, Persian, and the ancient Indian traditions of Ayurveda. So pulse diagnosis in Arab-Islamic medicine, they were the people in those times who were called pulse diagnosticians. So they were the people named Hippocrates, Aristotle, Erasistratus, Galen, and Avicenna was one of the main popular name who used to do the pulse examination for diagnosing and assessing the patients. And he termed it as pulsology. And Avicenna wrote, feeling the pulse is a trick which could be used for a person in love. What does that mean? What is a pulse? Pulse is touching, feeling, sensing. It's something that you consciously meditate and look at the pulse and feel it. So that's why it's called as the person who is in love. That person actually, you can assess that person with love. So love is in the form of it's like a touch therapy. Pulse is a touch, it's a feeling you take through the pulse. And when the first to describe the pulse in health and disease was Galen, not always correct, but refining Galen's theory on the pulse, the correct explanation of pulsation in the words of Avicenna, every pulse comprises 2 movements and 2 pauses. So the pulse, when you touch it with your fingertips, so you always observe the pulse, right with the left hand and left with the right when you do self-pulse analysis, which may not be accurate depending on what mental state you are in at that time, because if you're doing a self-analysis, you really need to be in a balanced state of mind. And if you're not in that mind frame or mindset, you may do the wrong analysis for yourself. So it's always better to see another practitioner or physician to be able to do the pulse analysis. So that's expansion, so 2 movements and 2 pauses. That's where Avicenna termed pulsology. In ancient times, Galen, as well as the Chinese physicians enormously, there was a unique type of pulse for every organ of the body and for every disease. So the Chinese, they started talking about the meridians according to the acupuncture. So when we talk about acupuncture, we talk marmas or marma sthan in Ayurveda. Marm, this is also the marm, and it's called a science of life because our life is based on the heartbeat and on the pulse beat. So you look at the variation and different types of pulse to feel different organs in the body. So that's how, when you look, that happens over the time with practice. When you look at the pulse, you need to basically, that comes with the time and practice. So it's all about practice. And more you're going to see people, your family, your friends, slowly and slowly you will start feeling the difference in the pulse and the variation, like what pulse is what and how. So Ayurveda is not just to feel the pulse as in for Vat Pitta Kapha, but with the Chinese, they could see along the meridians which particular organs are like attached with what particular pulse. So when Avicenna examined the pulse using the wrist, there is still used to be the pulse. Even though the Chinese were considered the great masters in pulse diagnosis, the classical antiquity used the pulse in health and disease to guide them in assessing the health condition or medical condition. Avicenna discusses pulse diagnosis extensively in his book, and Avicenna studied the Chinese system of pulse diagnosis, and based on that, I'm going to share these slides so you don't need to worry about like writing or anything like that. I would request Professor Sanjay ji that he can distribute if anyone requests, like, but that can be done. So all you got to understand is what concept we are following. When we come to the selection of food, it becomes very, very simple and easy to assess what kind of food should be selected according to the pulse when you understand what is pulse. And then with the Chinese system, in his treatise on the pulse, Rizolai Nabzia, because in Unani we call it Navz. हम कहते हैं नब्ज दिखाने जाना है हमें हकीम जी को, तो वैद्य जी को हमें नाड़ी परीक्षा कराना है. And similar way, in the treatise here, we are mentioning Avicenna, Unani system, they used to call Rizolai Nabz. Avicenna said pulse may be varied with different shapes, to shock, long, trembling, short, small shock, like all these different kind of like intensity in the nervous system when you observe the pulse. So it was assessed not only in the terms of whether it was weak or strong, but even regular, irregular, for example, whether it was large or small or hard or soft, like when you feel the pulse. So it's the love that you're showing and you're doing that touch. Touch is the love, because sparsh, like in Hindi we say, it's when we do offer the massage, it's called a love therapy, because that's again the touch that you feel, the energy transmission from your body to the other person's body, which is termed as love therapy, or it's termed as sparsh chikitsa, or like with a touch. So always the physicians considered that they would identify problems ranging from dropsy, diphtheria, pregnancy, and anxiety. To select the foods, because you need to know through the Nadi Pariksha what foods you need to advise, because then you may need to assess not only the prakriti, but you should know the vikruti of the person as well. And you can do that self-analysis, which I have been doing for years. So there is, according to Chinese, it just shows, they just use like 3 points, like we in Ayurveda say Vat, Pitta is the middle one, Kapha. And in Chinese, they say Kun, Guan, or Qi. And these are like the positions considered in the right and left hand. They feel the different organs. and at 3 different levels. So when you look in the left hand, it's heart, liver, kidney. Then you look at the right hand, it's lung, spleen, kidney, because kidneys are 2, obviously. And middle, if you notice in the pulse, it's going top to bottom. So if kun is a heart in the left hand and lung in the right hand, it's because at the top is the heart and the lungs. And then in the middle comes the liver and the spleen. So bottom comes the kidney. So which is like all goes like that. And then there are 6 positions, 3 levels, Quan, Wan, Chi. And these are the meridians that they look at, the basic 5 elements, like, and what they look at, like all the pancha tattva or pancha mahabhut. When they look in the hand, the meridians, or it's like 5. So we say vat, pitta, or air, fire, water, earth, ether. So vat, pitta, or panch mahabhut. And then same way, when it flows down, you look at the meridians, what comes down. So it's like the ether is connected to the brain, air is connected to the lungs, fire is connected to the intestines, kidneys is associated with water, and earth again to the heart. So if you look at reflexology, you look at maram, you will very easily understand how the pulse works, because pulse is something that is all based on marma, on consciousness, on awareness, and looking at the body from top to bottom. So it gives information of the state of balance in the body as a whole, that is Q, blood, yin, yang, and the constitution. The state of individual organs, yin organs, 3 areas of the pulse. Kun, guan, chi, as I said, inch, bar, cubit. Wrist crease, medial to radial styloid process, or the rare one. So then 3 levels of the pulse are superficial, middle, and deep. So when you feel at the top very superficial, then you press a little harder and go deeper, that's the middle. And the deepest part is the state of yin and yin organs. Middle is the state of blood, and the top is the state of ki and yang organs. So it's such an interesting analogy that's been built over the time with the pulse. Important assessment like health of the ki in general, relationship of yin and yang on the pulse, relative state of deficiency and excess, whether an exterior pathogen is present. So looking at the bacteria, which is happening today's date, like with COVID and all that. So we say it's more like a kapha and vat aggravation, and with our Ayurvedic, we all understand the basics like of Nadi Pariksha, that we look at 3 types, vat, pitta, kapha, and kapha, like how that is, and with the which kind of like animals walk in that particular pulse. You feel like it's hopping like a frog, or it's like a swan, or it's like slithers like a snake. So you have to feel not the pulse, you actually have to love the pulse. When you're holding, you actually close your eyes and you meditate, and that's what builds your focus on the pulse. So then all this is just like, I'm not going to go so much in detail, like which organs and everything. Pulse should not be checked like after massage and all that, taking food or alcohol. It should always best to do the pulse analysis fasting first thing in the morning, empty stomach, to do the right diagnosis. It doesn't indicate and mean that you can't see the pulse later in the day. You can, but you can't diagnose and analyze in a correct manner if you don't check the pulse or nadi. Fasting, empty stomach first thing in the morning, maximum until I would say 1 p.m. That's the latest that one should check the pulse, because after that, anyways, the nadi changes, because it will just like start showing you what you want to eat and you are hungry. So it's just going to change your pulse rhythm. So you won't be able to get the absolute analysis and the diagnosis. So the accuracy, to measure the accuracy of the pulse, like it depends on two factors, as I mentioned before: the awareness of the individual, what state of mind the individual is in, and to understand and interpret the subtle nature of the vibrations, what you feel. So the proficiency in Nadi Pariksha is gained by alertness, long clinical practice, as I mentioned before. It doesn't happen in a day. It builds, this practice builds over the years. It can take years. I've been practicing for 20 years like now, and I've seen thousands of people like, and I felt their pulse. Now I even just touch it and I come to know, blah, 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 and I say it. So it's a nadi pulse, like represents vital flow of life or energy, which passages down like the channels of circulation all over the body. The vital flow of life or energy enables the physician or to detect the patterns of blood spurts from the heart. And because obviously it's a supply of the heart and the brain and through the body, it's the circulation, and we have to look at the blood spurts, like which means like how the blood circulation is going or flowing. The health and functioning of the whole mind body constitution is determined, including the balance of the three biological humors. They're called va, pit, kaph. The healthy state of the heart, alarming signs of potential diseases that may attack at a later stage. And the diagnosis of the disease is largely based on examination. The pulse examination reveals and physical characteristics of the pulse. The physical characteristics are interpreted as signs along with prognosis, which gives us understanding the underlying root cause of the problem, what's causing all that. And it's a very important sphygmology in the pulse, like that I'm going to mention. Like the present scientific studies on Nadi Pariksha certainly given a new light of hope in the direction of the advancement of Ayurvedic pulse law and its presence, a good asset to this science it has provided. Particularly the sphygmographic tracings have given a new practice of standard Vatika, Petika, and Kaphage pulse made the pulse examination more easy and practical approach for an accurate diagnosis. So there are clearly defined methods of pulse diagnosis, traditional medicines that can lead to reasoning, well-defined syndrome determination. And significance of pulse diagnosis in modern and ancient times. What I analyzed myself, can you diagnose accurately through the pulse? Yes. Advent of advanced technological medical diagnostics has raised a question for the pulse diagnosis. Should its use be limited to confirm diagnosis by other means? Does the pulse diagnosis add the critical information that can alter the treatment? Is the training in pulse diagnosis quite limited? Unfortunately, yes. Do you need an experienced practitioner to check if you did correct pulse analysis? Do you keep fantasizing? You don't have to pretend that you are an expert in the pulse. Never ever behave like a quacker, because we are authentic, traditional physicians or practitioners that have been practicing this Indian legacy for the centuries. So it shouldn't be treated as a quack, because when people pretend to be someone who they are not, they will spread a wrong word in the community. And it's very, very important throughout the globe to make Ayurveda as an authentic medical science, because there is a reasoning behind this pulse. There is a reasoning behind choosing or selecting the foods according to the pulse. So what I'm going to come on to now is the quantum physics and the Eastern philosophy, how it's associated with the pulse. Quantum physics, who knows what is the difference? Basic stuff, everything is made of what we call it as a matter. What is the relation between the parts and the whole? How do the objects and the properties emerge? What is the role and locus of humans? So a major paradigm change may change the rules, raise up new questions, categories, and distinctions. So maybe the old controversies between the science and humanities, Western and Eastern, throughout just disappear. Obviously, wholeness, inherent interconnectedness, in addition to external relations, there are subtle, non-local connections between seemingly separate parts. A new kind of invisible factor, field, potentiality, information is affecting the formation of matter. So in determinism, irreversible development, the history does matter. So the measurements make a change into the unfoldment of events, and the human choices and activities matter for the correct or the absolute right analysis and diagnosis. Human choices, which means what they eat, what's their lifestyle, what are their eating habits, and how, what are they, what kind of environment they are in, which place they are in, what we call it as desh dushe and kal. We take all that into account. So activities matter, which means your lifestyle, what kind of lifestyle you follow, where do you work, what kind of environment you are in, what kind of like weather at different places, like seasons, and all that kind of things. So the reality is not mechanical. There is a room for activity of conscious human beings. And the quantum physics might be used to describe the formation of material and the mental phenomenon. So the mental states need not be identified with brain states, because your brain could be in a different state than actually your mental state. So allows non-local connections and parallels, interpretation, and Eastern ideas. Parallels and similarities, founding fathers, such as the people who actually founded all this quantum physics, Bohr, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, Bohm, and Krishnamurti, Fritz of Capra, the Tayo of physics in 1975. Physicists do not need mysticism, and the mystics do not need physics. But humanity needs both, which means physics, physical examination, and mysticism, what you interpret by identifying with the physical aspect and tendency towards idealism. So John Hagelin, Amit Goswami, they spoke about the unified field is the basis. They said that unified field is the basis of mind and matter. Matter is because we consider like a body is made up of 5 elements. Similar way, the body is composed of all these 3 biological humus, and like the matter is made up of 5 elements, which is the Panchatattva or Panchamahabhut. And everything is just vibrations on that field, because the pulse, when you feel, it's just the vibrations or the touch or the energy flow, or you feel and you sense that energy flow or the blood flow, or to check any kind of pulse analysis, to do any kind of assessment even for the condition. So the factual role of humans in the formation of reality has not been considered much. So Indian philosophy provides realistic ideas concerning the interplay between consciousness and matter, and clarifies the role of consciousness in humans and in the cosmic evolution. So we do believe that the quantum physics is relative, with more of the consciousness and the awareness and the vibrations in that unified field. So when we talk about evolution, we say plurality emerges from the immutable basis. So the consciousness and matter are intrinsic to reality. So when you look the body as a whole, that's what it shows in these slides, that the physical, energy, mental, wisdom, bliss, and the self. So there is a unified field around us, and we just come to the center point when we look at the pulse or we do the pulse analysis. So humans are conscious, evolving beings who are embedded into the corporeal layers of nature. So we as a body, we are surrounded by these vibrations and the unified field, which comes to the center point, and we look at the pulse to examine and sense and look at the evolving beings as humans and to analyze. So the relation between the mind, matter, and consciousness in our Indian philosophy, which we call it as Sankhya. So the purush and the prakriti, nature. So we go in tune with the body and the nature to create a balance in these imbalanced constituents in the body. And purusha and prakriti are different categories which get entangled in evolution as human being. So the consciousness is induced to all structures. Consciousness clearly refers to the awareness. We are aware of our surroundings. We are aware of our presence in the body. We are aware of something, what's going on inside the body. We are aware of the environment, what to feed this true life partner of ours, which is called the body. And that's called the Sankhya, where we say Manas, Tanmay, Bhut, and all that kind of like stuff, which we do Purush and Prakriti, and Sankhya we see at 24 kind of like that makes it like a tattva. So Brahma and Maya are ultimately united, and all things share the same consciousness, which is Brahma means Atma, and tat, tat tvam asi, which means the Maya, which is the material world. So we are connected. Our soul, our Atma is connected to this material world where people can evolve illnesses or sickness by the means of these material foods or whatever we eat, or the lifestyle or the surroundings or the environment. So there is a Sankhya, which is the dualism, purusha and prakriti. We treat them two separate categories. Vedanta, monism, only one exists. That is, it says we are all just a conscious beings, and the conscious unitely, we are united, and the Brahm, the soul, is united with the material world. So it's one, tat, tattvam se. So that's Vedanta. And then there is a Tantra. We call it as elaborate anatomy of different energetic levels, subtle bodies, whose functioning can be more or less cognized, evolution from instinctive responses to the cosmic consciousness, awareness. So it's more to do with the energetic levels, and we talk about all these tantra and dualism and the monism, potent frameworks to produce mental technologies. When liberated from the false identifications to the lower structures, consciousness is supposed to tune into the higher level of reality. So the potent frameworks to produce mental technologies, which means like we set up one framework and we produce or develop these mental technologies. So when our lower structure or the consciousness is liberated from the false identifications, we tune into the higher level of reality, which is the self. So, which means when we come from the outer external material world and we come and we get in tune with our body and we gain that consciousness or awareness, we actually achieve the self. And that what starts building your focus, and that's called the dhyan or the meditative state, the state of awareness, consciousness. And that what will make you do the proper self-analysis. So this is all about Sankhya, enumeration, the evolution of consciousness into the material nature. So set of 24 principles, we all know, as I spoke before, Purush, Prakriti, Manas, Buddhi, Ahankar, and the three trigunas, what we say as Sattva, Raj, and Tam, and they're further distributed into all these like organs of knowledge, action, and manas, like the brain or the action. So Brahm is the Purush and the Prakriti, the two different categories. So we talk about the consciousness and we talk about the creation. So these are two different categories. So consciousness is awareness, and creation is the nature, Prakriti. So what has evolved, basically, you have to, in that evolution, you have to create that level of consciousness and awareness to be able to do the analysis. So it's passive, active, within, outwards, singular, diverse, formless, innumerable forms. So the Purush Prakriti is the nature and the purusha is the body, the human evolution that evolved. So we basically have to do that self-awareness and self-consciousness to be able to get into understand that outer material world. And so we refer to the body when we refer to the consciousness, and we refer to the prakriti as a nature, the materialistic world. So the flow of consciousness and the pulse. So how that flows. So prakriti is, as I said, absolute nature. That what the manifested universe desire disrupts oneself. And then purusha, all potentialities exist within purusha and higher consciousness. So mahad, what it comes to buddhi, is the transcendental celestial intelligence. And buddhi is individual intellect or the mind. And ahankar is the feeling we all know of I am in every organism. When person says, this is me, I am, that pride, I am, that interface with your inner consciousness. And because that pride interferes with your analysis to do the pulse and to do the read, because there is that factor ahankar, which is called pride. So then we talk about, we know sattva. Sattva is pure essence, it's the movement. Rajas is the movement, and tamas is the inertia. Inertia is, we all understand from physics that it's the tendency of the body to continue in the state of rest or in motion. So every atom of the human being is a fragment of each of the cell, and every cell is of awareness. And the pulse is the individual's psychophysiology and the flow of consciousness represented by the three doshas. We call them doshas when they are in an imbalanced state, vata, pitta, kapha. When they are in a balanced state, we call them gunas. Not sattva, rajtam, but it's just vat, pitta, kapha in a prakriti form or a vikruti form. So what is consciousness and its role in nature? So what it is, consciousness in the material aspect, it's the source of substance, stability, lawful repetition, and the conscious aspect, source of knowledge, wisdom, deliberation. What you interpret through your buddhi, the mind, and then you make it as a source of knowledge, and you gather all that knowledge and you come to a diagnosis or an analysis. So the realm of life, the consciousness is the generation of new forms and the species, and the generation of inner realities, conceptions, models, theories, and the cultures. So connection to matter provides knowledge of the bonding hard facts, and connection to the consciousness provides means to understand and reprogram the stable patterns. So how you will create that balance in the imbalanced humus or the imbalanced doshas or the constituents of the body. So now, the celestial elements in the breath, as it's called a science of life, Ayurved, and the pulse. We look at the rhythm, the breath. As long as there is a breath, there is a life. It means we are alive and we exist. So how do we feel the breath? Either by touching the heart or we check the pulse. Now, it comes to the nasal septum. So the left one is Ida, right one is Pingala, the middle one is Sushumna, and the solar energy flow happens from the right nostril. So right nostril, because the right nostril is closer to the heart. And then we look at the chakras, the third eye and the throat chakra. And then we look at the heart. So it's all associated with consciousness or the awareness, because our heart has emotions and the blood spurts. The blood is supplied to the heart and to the rest of the body and the brain. So it's all the material aspect. But when do we eat the food? When every 90 minutes, the flow of the energy or the breath, it transfers by itself, and Ida, sometimes it will start flowing through the Ida, sometimes it will flow through the Pingla. But you won't start eating the food until it's the solar energy is flowing, and it's flowing through Pingla. So now this is what it's showing in the human body. So when do we eat? So if all that makes sense, why I'm talking about the relevance and significance of the pulse, because a pulse is the solar energy flow, and that what helps you to analyze, diagnose, and assess any person with a pulse when this solar energy is flowing through the right nostril. So the Pingla is when the food digests better and quicker if you eat at the time when the solar energy is flowing through the Pingla. So how you feel that? You close one nostril and you feel it's flowing through left, or you close with the index finger and feel the next. And you can always, you would observe that it's only flows through one nostril. It's not both flows at the same time. So that's what is identified in the pulse. And that's why it's done fasting and empty stomach to diagnose, to analyze correctly and more precisely and accurately, so to get the proper outcome. What to select, that you can select more. We recommend the diet is according to Vikruti, not according to Prakriti, because the Vikruti is the imbalance. So from the imbalanced state, when you have to get somebody into a balanced state, which vice versa fixes up the medical conditions as well, because all rogues or rog or diseases are either Vataj rog or Pitaj rog or Kafaj rog. So to balance these three means you are balancing all the 5 elements, because we know they are further composed of 5 each, but then they are even composed of another 2 each. So air, fire, water, these are the three tridoshas or tridosha or triguna that we need to assess in the pulse. But look at the prakriti first, and then you look at the Vikruti. Prakriti and Vikruti most of the time is different, but it could be same as well. So that happens with the practice. How you assess Prakriti and Vikruti. So there is a specific technique and all that you need to practice and learn. I can't teach everything like today or in one day, but yeah, you can attend the course like offered by Sanjay ji or myself. I even do the teaching regarding this pulse, but separate kind of different ways of doing the Nadi Pariksha analysis. That's all I wanted to share with you all, because it's more to do with what do we say, this prakriti is prakriti has to do more with your what type of prakriti and vikruti you have. You need to assess and do the Nadi Pariksha to be able to diagnose right, to be able to select the type of foods that you need to prescribe. So as I said, like with the food relation, because it's a nutrition week, I would, as I said, we have to be mindful about the flow of energy, the flow of pulse and the blood and all that. I think I made it very clear what's the relevance and significance to select the type of foods that you want to prescribe to your individuals, like what kind of foods you should be taking and not taking, because it's all about the balance and the imbalance in the doshas. And then you look at incorporating all the 6 shad gunas, madhur, tikta, kashayam, and all that kind of like 6 tastes we incorporate. And then we prescribe, like the diet has to do, we call it as, we do 4 types of fasting and the langhankaram. So it's altogether a very wide and diverse topic that we can talk about. Maybe I have to do another session, but it's more deeper you go into the pulse and into the nadi, more you learn to be more conscious, and to be more consciousness, raise that higher self and raise that focus and awareness in your mind, to be able to diagnose and analyze properly, to be able to prescribe right types of foods for the people, whether they need to follow vata diet, pitta diet, kapha. When you tell each of the individuals that yes, you can follow, because your vikruti at the moment is say pittaj, so you will follow pitta diet. Don't worry about vata and kapha, because like if you're trying to balance one, the other starts like dancing. So it's kind of like it will start shaking up, like the one dosha, when the other one you're trying to create a balance in. So all you need to focus on is on the vikruti, and once the vikruti has been assessed, then you prescribe them to follow the dosha that's aggravated or in an imbalanced state, and you prescribe that pacifying diet. So if the pitta is aggravated, you recommend them to follow pitta diet and pitta pacifying diet, I mean. And once that has been done, then you say, okay, once you have created that balance and you've done the prescribed in the medicines according to the condition and everything, you put them on a specific diet, then they maintain their lifestyle through yoga and through the diet, which is diet is the most important factor after the analysis. So if your analysis is right, your diagnosis is fine, you can't go wrong with the treatment and you can't go wrong with the diet. So it's very, 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 very important, critical to be able to not pretend. If you are not sure, don't just prescribe like, okay, I think you are vata, and you prescribe them vata diet. Sometimes that can cause them, which we call it as side effects in the modern medicine, which is people would react opposite and they would start getting more imbalanced rather than getting into a balanced state. So get your perfection first, and just look at the prakritis first, and then vikrutis, and then prescribe them any kind of like diet, or assess anything. With my experience, I can diagnose, I can assess people, and I can tell them after third month, like the women, that whether the issue is a boy or a girl, say for example. And then there is another one we call it as a thyroid condition. So that's a different type of pulse, like to assess whether the person has a thyroid condition. And then there is different things that you can assess, like by intensity of the pulse, like whether it's feeble, the person's immunity, or the homeostasis is up to the perfection level or low level, because we are talking a lot about the immunity these days, which is, I literally say, more important than the immunity is the homeostasis. So if the metabolism and assimilation is proper, and there is a balance in the body, poor balance is the poor immunity, and the homeostasis is poor. So to ultimately, to build up the homeostasis, you build up the immunity. So it's just about how much you know. You just give that information, take small steps, and start from there, and then slowly build it up. That's all I wanted to say today, but I'm open for the questions. I'll just like open the chat box. And
There is one question, madam.
yes,
Uh, uh,
whom
Sangeeta asked for how to differentiate swan type pulsation and snake type pulsation.
Swan and the snake.
This
Well,
is Sangeeta Ramkrishnan.
okay, so Ramakrishnanji, it all depends with the practice. Okay, so when we say it's a vata type, it's a pitta type or kapha type, then we look at the rhythms, like it's slithering like a snake, like the snake crawls. So you feel that intensity in the pulse, that the pulse is like slithering like a snake. It means like which dosha is aggravated. Yeah. And then you look like whether it's hopping like a frog. It means, okay, like the frog hops, you will feel that intensity in the pulse, that the pulse is going like dup, 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 like this. You feel that, and it means the pitta is aggravated, right? And similar way with a swan, you look like how the swan walks. So it's just the same movements, or the vibrations that you feel in the pulse, or the energy flow that you feel in the pulse, is just exactly like these three, swan, frog, or snake. If that answers your question, because it can't be explained in the words. You need to feel it and then differentiate, and it happens with the practice. When you will see many, you will see like, oh, is it like, okay, that's what is like snake, that what is like frog, and that what is like swan. Does that make sense?
There is one more phenomena, ma'am. Like
Yes.
as you said very correctly, that you have to consider the prakriti and the vikruti
Yeah.
together. So,
Mm-hmm.
but when you are selecting the food, you have to
Mm.
concentrate on the prakriti, or you have to concentrate on the vikruti, or you have to balance both.
I already answered that, like in my talk. I said focus more on the vikruti, because prakriti is what you inherited, or what you got by birth, your actual constitution, what you're born with. It could be by birth, you could have what you inherited, which is called genetics or genes. So you inherit the pulse also from your parents, as uh, or your grandparents mainly. They say your pulse would be something similar, like either your mom or your dad, or it could be both. So it depends on whose genes you pick up, that makes your prakriti. But vikruti is what you feel at that time, like, okay, this is the balance, this is the imbalance. And then the prakriti, you can even assess by their lifestyle, looking at their body frame and all that kind of like signs and symptoms that's being described in all sort of different books, like what does vata people look like lean and skinny and dry and whatever, and pitta, mixed kind of like thing, and kapha, like more like a bigger structures and heavy and more kind of like a whatever, like the moisture is more and dense, like, and so you can analyze the prakriti by their naturally built body frame. What's the color and appearance that you get from their eyes or skin, or how they talk, how they walk, how they assess. So these things can be analyzed even with the prakriti, but to analyze the prakriti, but with vikruti, pulse is the only way you can assess somebody's vikruti. You can't analyze that with the signs and symptoms. Vikruti, when you will look at the pulse, you would feel one dosha is always dominating the other one. So it can be clearly interpreted what the dosha of the person is and what's the guna, which is the actual prakriti and vikruti. Does that answer?
Yeah, it is. Ma'am, can I
Yeah,
suggest you something, request you rather,
yeah,
that can you suggest few of those food items which can
yeah.
be considered as vata pacifying, pitta pacifying, or kapha pacifying, which has been used internationally these days?
Well, like it's not, it's a wide range of foods and diverse foods that are there, right? So it's very difficult to say like right now, like to say all the vata foods or pitta food or kapha food. Like it's very difficult to consolidate all that like right now, because we are running out of time. But I do have a list of like foods which are vata, yes and no, and pitta, kapha, like all that kind of like thing. But I just, that's all reading that you will find in a lot of like a internet. If you search, you can find all sorts of like vata foods, pitta foods, kapha foods. Like that's not a difficult thing at all to do. Yeah.
May I request one more thing, ma'am? Can you
Yes.
provide us two or three examples of a diseases like you said about thyroid, you said about hypertension, you said about diabetic patients. So,
Yeah.
in those cases, how we can identify and differentiate between the food?
That all depends first on the analysis. Like, so once you have analyzed and you know the person has like some uh, most of the time people come with a pre-analysis or the pre-diagnosis from the GP or the doctor by doing all these pathology and blood tests and stuff like that. So most of the time they will come and they will say, oh, I've got a high blood pressure or a hypertension, I've got diabetes, I've got this, that. Like, so when you look at the pulse, you see, because diabetes, like say for example, is a kapha pitta row, pitta to some extent, but mostly it's a kapha row. So when you look at the pulse, you will feel that the person is more kapha pitta or kapha vata. And then you analyze like, okay, this person has kapha rog, and you analyze and then you prescribe them a kapha pacifying diet. That's how it's assessed and analyzed. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. So I
You're
think
welcome.
there are anybody want to have some questions, so I can unmute them. If you have questions, please let me know so I can unmute them.
For Nadi Pariksha, somebody has asked in the chat box, like any books To be honest, I never read from the books. Like to be honest, it's just a practice. Like honestly, and all I study about is more about on the internet. Like we can read something about Nadi Pariksha, but there is not a lot of information,
So,
unfortunately,
madam, very
because
few
a lot
people
of
are
people are
blessed like you
qualified
with
and blessed.
five
Yes,
generations having
yeah,
first diagnosis in the family. We are the
yes.
first generation people, so we had to
Yeah.
read.
Yes. So
Uh,
yeah, but you can always look at quantum physics and unified field and something relative with the pulse thing. Like it just happens with the practice and experience. Like I in 20 years time now I can confidently say I can assess even by looking, but still I always prefer to get the accuracy.
Mita,
I
you can
always
unmute.
prefer the pulse. Yeah.
So there is one question somebody wanted to ask Mita.
Yes.
Hello,
So
hi.
I asked her. Yeah,
Hello there.
Hi.
please,
Hi.
please,
It's been
please,
good
please
Hello.
put
conversation,
your question.
really good talk. Thank you for that. I just have a question. One of my patients
Yep.
has hemorrhoid, bleeding in stools. So it's a
Yes.
pitta, a high pitta, and he has to go to toilet a few times a day.
Yep.
Um, I have given a pitta pacifying diet, but it hasn't made much difference. Is there anything else you can suggest?
I think it's a pitta vata, like
Hmm.
more, because if you would suggest, because most of the time people think like if it's bleeding and if it's
Hmm.
to do with the blood, like
Hmm.
they generally prescribe like a pitta pacifying diet.
Yeah.
But I think you should focus more on the vata diet. I
Okay.
personally think, because most of the time, because of the bleeding,
Yeah.
excessive bleeding, the people can get dehydrated and they can
Right.
get their vata can get really out and
Uh-huh.
imbalanced. Like so I recommend that you use a combination of certain diets and prescribe like no raw salads and no cold foods and like anything hot and spicy is obvious because of pitta, but more to have lots of warm water and to get hydrated. And other thing I generally recommend is no raw salads. Always prefer cooked, steamed, boiled, warm in temperature food as much as possible, and have less of the like a citric acid or sour foods or anything like that. These are the kind of like recommendations, but I honestly don't prefer doing like this, because I look at the pulse first and feel it and see like what's the other dosha that's with it, and then I assess and I would recommend to anybody, because I don't feel comfortable in diagnosing anybody and recommending any kind of like specific diet, like over the phone or like on like how you are asking now. So I need to have a complete history of the client. I look at the conditions, what like from childhood till now. That's what you should, I advise and guide should do, that you should look at like right from the beginning till the end, what had been the lifestyle and how, whether it could be a vata signs or pitta signs or kapha signs, and then work accordingly. So, and Gritam is the best one. Gritam is like really very pitta balancing, cooling, and vata balancing as well. So, ghee is the best remedy. Like I feel lots in the food, cooking of the food in the ghee, and that's best advisable and recommendable. So yeah, that's the only tip I can give for now, like Smita. So if you, yeah, I can't hear you, Sanjayji. You're muted.
Pranita has asked one question, that
Yes,
what kind of food you are suggesting for a depressed uh, person who is sad for some reason.
more vata pacifying diet.
Any more questions? Anybody has some questions? Please put it in the chat.
or avocado, like something that can generate happy hormones, like avocados, banana. They generate and secrete like a happy hormones, and I think like that would be the recommendation from my side. And with all that, like Brahmi and Shankapushpi and all those made the herbs, like, and all that, but with a diet, something that helps in generating serotonin, dopamine, which are called the happy hormones, and that would please them and make them happier from deeper inside. Um, that's the foods like that generally I can recommend. But even almonds, to get rid of the vata, because like almonds are oil enriched, so that's something even made there as well. So yeah, so almonds, like even the greens, and a lot of like what do we call as don't recommend ashwagandha to everyone, like, but depends, like, and saraswatarishtam and all that kind of like stuff, that I generally prescribe like to the people with mental health issues or any kind of like depression or anxiety. Yeah. Is it okay? Yeah. Smitaji?
Yeah, thank you. Because almost all the questions are over. So
Yep.
thank you very much, Vanita ji. It is definitely we are privileged to have you here.
Thank you.
And it was wonderful to know the learnings you have really gone through with your families and by the gurus.
Yes.
And because of this understanding of Vedanta, Sankhya, and other things, your analysis of pulse is at different level. Normally,
Yes.
we people in India, or those who are from the first generation Vaidyas, they do pulse analysis based on the findings observed in the pulsation. But we
Yep.
know there are some metaphysical aspects to the pulse which can give
Yes.
you more of understanding. And everybody is, because it will be slowly developed over a
Yep.
period, everybody will get that metaphysical analysis and understanding. And
Yep.
probably, if they put their energies into learning these processes,
Mhm.
it will be easier for them to analyze the pulse. And after analysis of the pulse, it can be definitely converted into any knowledge, including the food.
I
Thank you very
agree.
much. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for everybody for joining us. We have people
Namaste,
across the
and
world.
thank you. Yeah,
Yeah,
feel
thank you
free
very
to
much.
share my email if they have any questions, like
Yep.
Vinita
I'll do
at
that.
vibeayurveda.com.
You are going to share the
Slides,
PPT.
yeah. So,
So there is
yes,
one slide of your contact. So they can
yes,
always
yes.
have that.
Yeah. No problems. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
the opportunity,
Thanks
and
a
thank
lot.
you everyone for listening patiently. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mishraji. Thank you, Umatai. It was wonderful to have you here. Thank you, Sudhirji. I can find many of my known people around here. Thank
Yeah.
you, Jabbu Arnelji. Sometime we'll meet once again. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.